Warsaw Uprising began on Tuesday, the 1st of August in 1944, when a siren went off across the city at 5 p.m. That was the official beginning, but more of that later. The uprising erupted as a response to occupation by Nazi Germany since 1939. This was one of the most dramatic events of not only the European theater, but of World War II in its entirety. And it is a battle that has gone down in history as one of the most gallant. The insurgents wanted nothing more than to liberate their city, which had been occupied by Nazi Germany since September of 1939, much of it destroyed. The facts are astounding. The uprising lasted 63 days. It was only supposed to take up to a week. Then there would be support from allies. There would be support from the Russians, who waited instead and watched as the Germans fought the insurgents and murdered civilians for most of the next 63 days. There were 30,000 Home Army, or AK soldiers, Armii Krajowa in Polish, and only 10% of them were armed. On the German side, there were 20,000 fully armed troops, plus militia, plus police. They estimate that 18 to 20,000 insurgents died, that is, the defenders of Warsaw died. 25,000 were wounded or injured. About 150,000 civilians died as the Germans moved to completely eradicate Warsaw from the map of Europe and the world. Last shot of the uprising was fired on the evening of 2nd October 1944. And this is the story. W hour, freedom hour, Wolność hour was 5 o'clock. But that's not when it started. That's when the general uprising started. But the first movements of the day took place very near here, and this is a stone in commemoration of the beginning of the uprising. Whether it was 1:50 or 1:50 p.m. or 1:30 p.m., it doesn't really matter, but sometime between the hours of 1 p.m. and 2 p.m., the first action took place here totally by accident. It's not as if the Germans didn't know. The Germans had some idea that something was happening. They had been sending away troops throughout July, and in fact, at the end of July, it would have been much easier for the rising to take place. But within the last couple of days of July, troops were reinforced in the city. And so when word was about, and when the uprising began, the Germans were somewhat prepared. It wasn't the surprise it was meant to be, but this was a total surprise. It was a group of youngsters who ran into a truck carrying German gendarmes. And there was a bit of a standoff. Apparently they, according to the accounts of the time, they looked at each other. They wondered, should we engage the Germans and the, what were basically scouting age youngsters, teenagers, effectively, who were walking up the street, heading to their rendezvous point with overcoats with guns underneath of various kinds. What happened next was that they fired on the Germans and threw a couple of grenades into the truck and fled. Okay, so that was the beginning of the first action. Let's go down and look at the street where it actually took place and give you a little background on that. We just changed position so you could see Kraszinskiego Street, and Suzina Street is just over here. So the Polish youngsters came out of here wearing overcoats with submachine guns and other weapons and grenades underneath their coats, looking like tough guys ready for action. The Germans were coming up the street. Remember, back then this was a new neighborhood. Żoliborz was created in the 1920s and 30s, so, where there was nothing before except small villages. So it was a new neighborhood and a very vital part of the northern part of the city. And so the Germans came up the street in their wagon. They eyed each other, and youth being what youth is, they decided to have a go, and threw the grenades into the back of the truck, had a few shots at the Germans, and the Germans knew that things were happening. The word spread quickly through the city that something was about to happen, and indeed it was, because just over 3 hours later you had the entire uprising, and targets were taken right across the city, from the old town particularly, also the center of town, the Śródmieście, and Mokotów, which is an elegant neighborhood at the time and today, but more so before the war, before everything was destroyed. So the center and the old town, and these will be places we investigate next. So goodbye from Żoliborz, or Żoliborz, as Norman Davis calls it in his book 44 Rising, and we'll see you tomorrow night. We're going to be following the Warsaw Uprising, but telling you the story, place by place.